In this video, I want to start talking through David Hume's arguments about morality and reason, and it'll probably take us a few different stages to get through all that he covers in this selection, but we'll get started on it now. So here's three portraits of David Hume. To my knowledge, these are the only ones that we have. Hume lived from 1711 to 1776. He was a Scottish philosopher, the most eminent philosopher of the Scottish Enlightenment, and by many accounts, the most important philosopher ever to write in the English language. Hume makes one of his most famous arguments in this passage that we are looking at. And his main thesis, which is captured in the title, is that moral judgments are not produced by reason. He's going to make several arguments in support of this conclusion, four that we're going to look at, that moral judgments are not produced by reason. What does he mean when he says this? Well, let's take it apart a little bit and cash it out. So by moral judgments, he means any distinction that we make between right and wrong, good and bad, virtue and vice. So for example, if I say stealing is wrong, that's a moral judgment. If I say courage is a virtue, that's a moral judgment. And he wants to say that these sorts of claims are not produced by reason. What does he mean by reason? Well, by reason, he means our faculty for making arguments, basically our ability for making arguments. So the meaning of his statement is that our moral judgments, our claims about right and wrong, good and bad, are never supported by any good arguments. There are no good arguments, what he's saying, in support of any of our moral claims. They're not rational. And that's a big deal to claim that. So let's look at why he's making this claim. He's got four arguments, and here's how I label them. By the way, these are page numbers. They refer to the 4th edition of Schaeffer-Landau, not the 5th, so they may not be found on the exact same pages if you're looking at the 5th edition. I haven't updated it yet. The first argument that he is going to give is what's called the motivation argument. The second one is called the representation argument. The third argument, I don't have any neat and tidy title for. His idea basically is that morality is neither a relation of ideas nor a matter of fact. And then the final argument, which is found in the last paragraph of the whole reading, is probably the most famous argument that he ever made about moral philosophy. And that is that you cannot infer an ought statement from an is statement. All right, let's start with the motivation argument. Here's the passage where we can find the motivation argument. He says, since morals, therefore, have an influence on the actions and affections, it follows that they cannot be derived from reason. And that because reason alone, as we have already proved, can never have any such influence. Morals excite passions and produce or prevent actions. Reason of itself is utterly impotent in this particular. The rules of morality, therefore, are not conclusions of our reason. Now, this little paragraph actually makes the exact same argument twice. He makes his argument the first time in this one big long sentence, and it's a great exercise to use your logical keywords to identify the premises and the conclusion. It works really nicely. You can do the whole thing. And then he repeats the exact same argument in these three sentences. And he states premise 1 in the first sentence, premise 2 in the second one, and the conclusion marked by therefore in that last one. So it's a nice paragraph to use to try out your skills for identifying and analyzing arguments. But let me break it down for you, okay? Premise 1, moral judgments have an influence on the actions and affections. Premise 2, reason alone can never have any such influence on the actions and affections. And therefore, moral judgments can't be derived from reason. Now, what does he mean, and why would he say these things? His first premise is that our moral claims have an influence on our actions and our affections. And by affections, he basically means your emotions, your passions. Those are words he'll use, for all I can tell, interchangeably. Now, why would he say this? His idea is this. Look, if you have a moral belief, if you think that stealing is wrong, if you make a moral judgment like that, that's going to have an influence on your actions and on your emotions, the way you feel about that action. So there you are in the 7-Eleven thinking, man, I would really like to steal a slushie out of the machine right now. Well, if you form the judgment, though, that that's wrong, or people who steal slushies are bad people, that's going to influence how you feel about that action. That's going to put a little check on you. You're going to think, well, that's not as attractive to me as it was. And it might slow you down from stealing that slushie. Now, don't mistake him here. He's not saying that we always follow our moral judgments. We don't. You may go right ahead and steal that slushie anyhow. His point is that your moral judgment that stealing slushies is wrong is going to have some little degree of influence. Maybe small, maybe great. It depends on the person. Some degree of influence on how you feel about that action and whether you take that action. Maybe you steal the slushie anyway, but you feel slightly less happy about the slushie, even just a hair, than you would have if you didn't think that, well, stealing slushies is wrong at the end of the day. Okay, so that's what he means by premise one. Is it plausible? Well, it's up to you. Think about that. Do you think that moral judgments really do have an influence on our actions and affections, even if it's a small one that can be overridden by selfishness and other motives? Premise two says that reason alone can never have any such influence on our actions and affections. Reason, he says, our ability for making arguments, never influences our emotions or our actions. What is he talking about? What does this mean? Well, Hume is saying here that when you draw a conclusion, when you form a belief on the basis of an argument, it just doesn't have any impact on your emotions or on your actions. Now, you may think that's crazy. Hume knows it's controversial. In other parts of his work, he's given some arguments in support of that already, and but he's going to remind you of what he thinks is his most important argument in the next phase here, in the next argument that he gives. He's going to explain to you why you should believe this very controversial premise two, which says that reason never influences our actions and affections. Okay, so if you're unconvinced of premise two so far, give him a shot to defend it in the next segment, which is supposed to provide further support for this first argument. All right, so that's why he believes the two premises. If the premises are true, would the conclusion validly follow from it? But yeah, it is a valid argument. I haven't formalized it according to propositional logic, but this is a valid argument. Basically saying, look, if our moral judgments influenced, he's saying moral judgments influence actions, reason doesn't. So moral judgments can't come from reason. If moral judgments did come from reason, then they wouldn't influence our emotions and affections. But moral judgments do influence our emotions and our actions. Therefore, they must not come from reason. That's his idea. All right, that's the first stage of his argument. As at a first glance, premise might look plausible, might be wrong, but it looks kind of plausible. You can kind of see where he's coming from. Premise two, you're probably scratching your head over it, and we've got to see, he needs to show us the money on that one. So in our next video, we'll see, can he show us the money? Can he prove to us that reason alone never has any influence on our actions and affections? We'll see.